When undergoing the process of upgrading your CPU, it's really important to use the right tools. In this case, you definitely want to use a generic Chinese GoPro because it's going to give you the best leverage on the screws you're going to have to unscrew if you want to input this new CPU into your motherboard. That's right, Leviathan is getting a CPU upgrade. It's time to say goodbye to my engineering sample 12-core Xeon and welcome a brand new second-hand 4 GHz 6-core monster. So, why the CPU change? It's a legit question. Why move backwards from 12 cores to 6? Well, I'll give you one word. You probably already know what the word is. And that word is gaming. As I detailed briefly in my previous video for this machine, my build video, where I started investigating its performance, I found that even with my GTX 1050, I was getting some CPU bottlenecking. There were areas in some games, not all of them, but some games, where turning down the graphical quality settings would not net me more frames per second. It just wouldn't. My CPU was what was holding me back, and it certainly wasn't the number of cores that was holding me back, it was the clock rate. You see, the old CPU was an engineering sample, and as awesome a CPU as it was a B-stepping sample, which means that not everything in the CPU worked. And the thing that did not work with this particular CPU was the turbo multiplier. The E5 2696 V2, which is what it was, I still have it here, but it's not plugged in, obviously. The E5 2696 V2 is supposed to turbo up to 10 turbo buckets, which means basically plus 1 gigahertz from its base clock. So its base clock is 2.5, it's supposed to turbo up to 3.5 under a single core load, which makes it a reasonable, everyday, casual gaming CPU. However, this particular example never got past 2.8. Under no circumstances could I get the cores to go any higher than 2.8 gigahertz. 1 core loaded, 2.8 gigahertz. 2 cores loaded, 2.8 gigahertz. 12 cores loaded, 2.8 gigahertz. And I've got some benchmark numbers from the replacement CPU, and you can see that there is an actual difference. There's a very tangible difference in the clock speed versus performance that we're getting here. Okay, so enough blabbing about this. I'm sure you're all looking for some numbers, and I'm very happy to give them to you. One other thing to note before we get into them is that I did end up trading in that dusty old GTX 1050 for a shiny new GTX 1080 Ti as the prices started to level off and even drop below MSRP with the release of the RTX cards. So yeah, you can see the comparison of going from a 1080 on a 2.8 gigahertz CPU to a 1080 on a 4 gigahertz CPU. Spoiler alert, I am still CPU bound. Anyway, here are the numbers. So, what conclusions can we draw from this? Well, synthetic benchmarks are definitely that, synthetic. The 3D Mark graphics scores showed little or no improvement when changing the CPU, which is exactly what you want to see in a graphics stress test. Similarly, the CPU tests didn't really show us anything we didn't already know or didn't already assume. We got higher single-threaded performance at the expense of multi-threaded performance. What I found most interesting was the Cinebench scores. When normalized to 100%, the chip gains almost the same percentage of single-threaded performance as it gives up in multi-threaded performance. In the end, though, really, the game's tests were the stars of the show. The award for most GPU-bound game goes to Dawn of War 3, which saw no improvement to maximum frame rates with the switch to the 4 GHz CPU. The award for most improved mid-range definitely goes to Dirt Rally, which is now buttery smooth and quite enjoyable, as evidenced by the high minimum frame rates we saw in the graphs. Finally, least well-optimized still goes to Guild Wars 2, but I do at least see a smooth 60 FPS in a lot more areas now. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.